In London they call everybody's second favourite team, apparently. Well, in the 90s they looked destined to drift out of the Football League. Then Mohamed Al-Fayed purchased the club, injected a bit of chaos and, crucially, money into the mix. This is the rise of Fulham Football Club.
Al-Fayed can afford himself a smile. The first part of his dream under Keegan has come true. What a night for Fulham Football Club.
Let's not dial it back too far today. We'll visit the misty-eyed 19th century of Fulham, I'm sure, in a future video, but let's start here. Fulham Park Rangers, a three-word obituary for any Fulham supporter in the late 80s. Crimson Chin himself, Jimmy Hill, was the man sweeping to the rescue of the football club as it perilously skirted with the edges of inexistence. Fulham had recently been relegated to the third tier after a yo-yoing time of it in the 70s. Long gone were the days of Bobby Moore, George Best and Rodney Marsh, as well as an FA Cup final, never mind the top-flight era of the 60s. But it was due to get worse before it got better. With the advent of the 90s, the Cottagers languished dangerously close to relegation to the 4th Division. This is a club that hadn't played in the basement of English football since 1932. The inevitable finally happened in 94 after 21st place now meant demotion to the 4th tier of the game. They didn't rattle right back up the divisions like they had come quite handy at doing in the 80s or become quite famous for in more recent times. Instead, the nadir was reached on February the 10th, 1996. Hartlepool United came to town, got a point out of Fulham. They were second from last in the Football League, only 6 points ahead of the only relegation spot occupied by Torquay United. Now we know that Stevenage Borough stood no chance of making their first place in the conference a promotion reality due to missing the mark of Football League's requirements, but back in February 96 Fulham weren't to know that. Their very existence was at threat. Enter Mickey Adams. He'd been at the club since 1994 after a fairly successful spell at Southampton as a budding fullback. His former manager at the Dell, Ian Branfoot, took him in and under his wing as a player coach. Now Branfoot was gone, the 34-year-old Adams was now asked to drag Fulham out of the mire. The effect? Instant. Exeter beaten in what was the club's second victory of the year. Then once Doncaster, Cardiff, Leyton Orient and Plymouth were all vanquished too, could the club breathe a huge sigh of relief. The record books now state Fulham finished 17th on 53 points, some 24 ahead of the eventually not relegated Torquay United. They do not tell just how fragile Fulham had been, and they wouldn't because of what Mickey Adams was able to do next.
Oh, what a goal! It might have actually come. First pick for the action here. Herrera's cross. And they're in front. Well, there's nothing typical about that.
Any manager handed a 5-year deal, especially in the 4th tier of English football, know he's not really going to be there for 5 years, but on this form, Mickey Adams could have signed a 10-year deal and it still wouldn't have been enough. Fulham had long sealed their promotion back to the 3rd tier with a 0-0 draw at Mansfield on April the 8th. They'd eventually claimed the title by one solitary goal, but a massive 15 points ahead of 4th place Northampton Town. Everything at Craven Cottage was changing. We just didn't know how violent those changes would be until the summer of 1997. May 29th, 1997, that was the date Fulham FC changed forever. That was the date when Mohamed Al-Fayed was announced as the club's new owner. Famously owner of Harrods, he's shot into the public eye by scooping up 30% of House of Fraser back in the mid-80s. Now, he was expanding his empire into sport. Not knowing a lick about football, he was invited to take lunch on Matthew Harding's steak at Chelsea before Jimmy Hill's abrupt Fulham departure caught his attention. Fulham would be cheaper, they'd be easier to manage, and he could have total control. This, to any billionaire, was music to the ears. The eventual sum it took to purchase the club was a paltry £6.25 million, with a further 8-figure investment needed for the squad and infrastructure that eventually bloated to 190 million quid, but still, it turned out to be an incredible deal. Again, like any billionaire, he wasn't shy of bombast, declaring that Fulham would be the Manchester United of the South. Premier League football as well was possible within 5 years apparently for this club that had finished 3 points ahead of Carlisle United. It wouldn't have taken long for Mickey Adams to get paranoid if he was that way inclined, given that Al-Fayed was flaunting Kevin Keegan about town. The rumour mill was in overdrive. Keegan to Fulham was the inevitable conclusion reached for.
And Fulham finally won it. But having finally notched his first goal for the club, Paul Moody was to curl in a second.
Not instantly, although it may well have been, as Mickey Adams broke numerous transfer records in acquiring talent like Paul Moody and Steve Hayward for 6 figures, but mere weeks after signing a boatload of players and this footage from a home win over Plymouth, the inevitable finally happened. Mickey Adams was gone 8 months into a 5-year deal.
We have reports from Paris that Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a car accident and that her partner, Dodi Fayed, has also been killed. They were apparently being pursued by paparazzi on 2 motorcycles.
Now you're armed with that slice of context, any normal conclusion would be of an emotional father making poor business decisions, but there was nothing of the sort involved in the Mickey Adams deal. Al-Fayed had likely long decided that he needed somebody else in the hot seat at Craven Cottage. Kevin Keegan was the unsurprising man in, but in the surprising position of Chief Operating Officer, just another name for Director of Football, whilst Ray Wilkins took on the job of Fulham manager. Now it was said the great Mohamed Al-Fayed empire of Fulham FC could begin.
Paul Bracewell then found Scudetto in the second half. And Paul Watson scored his first goal of the season, but Fulham weren't down and out. And Matthew Brazier hammered home the equaliser.
He had demanded the league title, and that ambition was taken up another notch in the transfer market once Mickey Adams had been chopped. From Paul's Bracewell and Scudetto, the real measure of intent was seen in the £2.1 million acquisition of Chris Coleman from Premier League Blackburn Rovers. For any normal club rising from the 4th tier to put on a half-baked automatic promotion push, which ultimately faltered due to inconsistencies on the final straight, that'd have been enough. Settle for the playoffs, move on. But didn't you know now that Fulham were no ordinary club? After losing their last 3 fixtures to position themselves well within the playoffs nonetheless and confirm a semi-final against Grimsby, Ray Wilkins was spectacularly binned off. In his place, with 2 ties ahead of a potential Wembley final, was the man you suspect Al-Fayed had wanted all along. Kevin Keegan was to be Fulham manager, belatedly.
It's Peter Beardsley. It's 1-0 to the 10 men. Fulham 1, Grimsby 0. Past David Smith. And it's in, it's 1-1. Oh, here's Donovan. And it's there, 10 minutes to go.
But it didn't guarantee success. A week after the Grimsby debacle, Kevin Keegan was given the job on a permanent basis. The plan still remained. Fulham not only must be promoted, but they had to be a Premier League unit by 2002. The transfer activity was never going to relent. John Solarco and Jeff Horsfield, the big names up front, whilst Gus Ullenbeek and Kit Simons refreshed the backline. With an increasingly star-studded team and a famous manager at the helm, it was now promotion or bust.
It's his free kick to Hayward, and Lehman tries to divert it in.
2 substitutions, one against Liverpool, one against Manchester United, and now here's Horsfield! Here he is with his right, flicking it up towards Albert, and Philip Albert!
And Horsfield, 24 goals this season, comes through. It's fallen for Hales. He can put it in.
3 men in the box. One of them is Moody. Paul Moody has scored!
So promotion it was by quite some distance, as it turned out in the end, a staggering 101 points. As a football team, nobody had come close to this since Swindon Town's 4th tier 102-point effort in the 1985-86 season. As a 3rd tier record, however, Fulham had edged out Bournemouth's 97 points from 1987. In any other season, it would have run away with the records and the headlines, had Sunderland not just posted 105 points in the division above to reach the Premier League. That now had become Fulham's goal. Outside of league competition, Fulham had had their brushes with greatness, only bowing out at stadia like Anfield in the 3rd round of the League Cup and at the home of the eventual treble winners Manchester United in the 5th round of the FA Cup. But there had already been a wee spanner chucked in the works. England had arrived with an opportunity hard to turn down for Keegan. They had to bring someone likeable in after their last manager had just told the world that disabled people were being punished for sins in a previous life, and he hid it behind a religious excuse. It wasn't as if England had kicked on though since France '98, losing to their only real rivals for Euro 2000 qualification in Stockholm before drawing at home to Bulgaria. Keegan would improve matters but only slightly, earning 5 points from his 3 competitive fixtures. Now he was left with a dilemma. In acquiring a mix of youth and experience from Steve Finnan to Barry Hales and Peter Beardsley, Fulham were clearly signing a team for the Premier League. Alas, the pull of the national team proved too much. 2 weeks after confirming promotion with a win over Gillingham, the announcement was made: Keegan to England. He'd scraped the country into Euro 2000 where, despite their first tournament win over Germany since the blindingly obvious, they'd bounce out of the groups. He'd end up resigning in the literal bowels of Wembley after Demanshaft had gotten their revenge in the stadium's final game.
Now for Horsfield, the flag stays down, still Horsfield, and he's hit the bar, and the follow-up is in the back of the net.
Away though, and there's a chance here for Paul Pescasolido.
Paul Bracewell had been promoted from assistant manager to the manager. In the meantime, the club continued to look upwards, moving to the state-of-the-art training facility known as Motspur Park. Meanwhile, the transfer wheels kept on turning. Alan Melville was acquired for defence, whilst Lee Clark came into midfield, and both Karl-Heinz Riedler and Stan Collymore were signed for the attack. And yet, amidst a 27-game unbeaten run in the league at the Cottage and Al-Fayed attempting to buy the Twin Towers, no, not them ones, they ran out of steam just before Christmas and were never really able to get going again. In Leicester, they found an unfortunate rival in the quarter-finals of the League Cup, only bowing out on penalties to the eventual champions, whilst the Foxes' Wembley foes, Tranmere, dumped Fulham more annoyingly out of the FA Cup 5th round shortly thereafter. Naturally, Al-Fayed was quick to move, cutting Bracewell after a loss at Portman Road in March 2000, with the club apparently unforgivably sat in 10th with their playoff dreams dashed. Karl-Heinz Riedler was the man promoted to the hot seat, but a man quite clearly not cut out for the management. The German would flee come the end of the season after leaving the coaching to his assistants. The next man would have a better idea.
It will be now if Sahar can put this away. It probably is over.
Short, and Louis Sahar is clean through here. Should be 2-0, and it is.
Jean Tigana was the man acquired for the next phase of the Al-Fayed project. Formerly the hero that helped bring France Euro 84 in his playing days, now he was busy winning as a manager as well. He'd scooped up the French title as Monaco boss and had taken a team with talent like Thierry Henry and David Trezeguet to the Champions League semi-finals ahead of teams like Alex Ferguson's Manchester United. As Al-Fayed squirreled away in the background, forming what would become one of the more formidable women's teams in Europe before sadly pulling the funding due to his impatience on the English women's game's professionalism, Tigana got to work on the men's side of things. One of the first pieces of business he got done was bringing a young Louis Sahar from Metz for £2.1 million. Derided from his short time at Newcastle, the Frenchman would become prolific given a season to adapt in a lower division. Naturally, that was not all. Luis Boamote signed to accompany Sahar up front, whilst the experienced John Collins knitted everything together behind them. Following in Arsene Wenger's footsteps, Tigana adopted a more continental, more professional style to what was still a British-centric game. The rewards, predictably, were reaped.
Oh, great work from Sahar. Right, fantastica!
Goldbeck. Sahar's there! Towards Davis, and Friedler's dropped it, and Sahar has scored!
Another 101 points, Fulham racked up 30 wins from 46 fixtures and eventually finished 14 points ahead of Bolton, sealing promotion away at Huddersfield with 5 games to spare. The one casualty from the season was Chris Coleman's career-ending car crash in January 01 that not only broke his leg but his ankle, and on top of that, ruptured his ACL. He'd become important again later on. He'd be quickly replaced on the team sheet by Alan Goma at a £4 million fee from Newcastle. Then, in the summer, they went a bit mad. The statement of intent had already been acquired when the £70 million development of Craven Cottage was signed off on in February, but then came the stars that would adorn that new stadium. How about Edwin van der Sar from Juventus? If you wanted outfield players to quench your thirst, there's a French duo of Steve Malbranc and Sylvain Legwinski, who were swapping big teams in Lyon and Bordeaux to join Fulham. Whilst the hunt for a striker floundered with the attempts to sign Freddie Canute and Teddy Sheringham, another Frenchman in Steve Marley, even at a ludicrous $11.5 million, was seen as a positive at the time. Fulham were officially Premier League ready.
Beautifully brought down by Sahar! Fulham's
post with a goal just before half-time from Lewinski, and after a second from Malbron, only too late.
Right from the off, it was obvious that Fulham belonged, from holding their own on the opening day at Old Trafford in spite of a loss to 5 points against teams that would become mid-table rivals in Sunderland, Derby and Charlton. It was a solid opening. The season got better as West Ham were sworn off at Upton Park and Craven Cottage became a tough place to come and play football. Chelsea and Leeds were held there, while Southampton, Newcastle and Everton all walked away empty-handed. Come Christmas, Fulham were in the top half, sitting on 23 points with a game in hand. Relegation was 7 points behind them, with Champions League football almost as close. They were mid-table as fuck, but a good mid-table as fuck, since this was a golden era of a Big Six before the Big Six: United, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, Leeds and Newcastle, with handy teams in Spurs, Villa and Everton, not to mention the upstarts of Blackburn, Charlton, Sunderland and Ipswich who had rocked the boat, and Fulham were right there in the mix. And they weren't stopping. John Carew was in the building for a medical after a proposed £7.5 million switch from Valencia. Ultimately, a knee complaint would show up and Al-Fayed backed out of the transfer.
For half-time, a more scrappy effort than his previous one did make the net.
Malbronk, and he scores!
The balance sheet may well have said 24 million quid lost, the biggest at the time in British football's history, but Fulham fans had a fucking good time of it. Back in the big time for 33 years and finishing a comfortable 13th was good enough. Then you had the cup run, which took the Cottagers beyond Walsall and West Brom before being only eliminated at the semi-final stage against Chelsea. It was an almighty season. Then the cracks. Franco Baresi came through the door, not as a player obviously. Al-Fayed wasn't that mad, but as a director of football. He lasted 82 days. Fulham signed a player who liked to dress up as Zorro, as well as an attempted cash grab on the East Asian market, and then the season started.
Inamoto slides it on Sava. Inamoto, great football! Oh, what a super...
But the fact is, they've been all over the place in these closing stages. Lewinski!
Now Marley. Davis, who's looking for it down the centre, is hit, pulled down, hit by Sava!
It's the in-swinger, and they've got their goal as well, and the man who's got it is Stephen finally.
To look at a record of Fulham on Christmas Day between their first and second seasons is to not see a great deal of difference. They'd won one more game, gained one fewer point, they were further down the table, but not really that much nearer relegation, which should always have been the aim. And then they had done so with the distraction of Europe. First with 8 games of classic inter-toto football, which always had a trip to Scandinavia, one to southeastern Europe, and then a couple of light games against Big Five league opposition. Then have 2 victorious journeys in difficult trips to Croatia in the UEFA Cup, combined with a hard-luck tale from the third round against German opposition, as well as continued form back home. It was a good season. They finished 4 points better off in the league, albeit 2 closer to relegation, but had racked up 3 more wins and 5 more goals. This, with the added context that they were playing at Loftus Road for the first of 2 seasons during Craven Cottage's redevelopment, despite an attempt at ground sharing with Chelsea with a permanent view. But the bloom had long been off the rose regarding Tigana and Al-Fayed. When the owner got it in his head that he wanted someone gone, they were gone. It was announced on March 26th, the club 13th, that Tigana's contract would not be renewed. After defeats against Blackburn and Liverpool, he was fired before he could even see that contract out. Enter an incredible roll of the dice.
It's a chance for Fulham second, they wrap it up.
It may be that they will, because Van Nistelrooy...
Fulham had extended an olive branch to Chris Coleman when it became obvious that he was never going to be able to play football again professionally. A job on the coaching staff was his, but a little did he know that before the season was out, he'd become the Fulham manager, first on a temporary basis, but then permanently as the league's youngest manager, aged just 32. Also in were the trio of Mark Crossley, Mark Pembridge and Moritz 15,000 volts, combined with the sales of Steve Marley and Finnan and an inexperienced manager. It was easy to see why the Cottagers were picked out for relegation. Then the season started and teams like Borough, Spurs, Blackburn and Leicester all fell before their magnum opus, a 3-1 triumph at Old Trafford. Whilst their March return to the theatre of dreams meant the end of a decent cup run, it allowed Fulham to focus their minds on the running. They had lost their attacking fulcrum in January, Louis Saha deserting for Old Trafford in a £12 million deal. They could hardly refuse that type of money. It was Steve Marley money, after all. Fulham wound up 9th, Saha still their top scorer despite flaking out halfway through, but this time didn't need goals. They were obdurate enough at the back to maintain a top half finish. This with Coleman wrapping his team up in a 4-5-1, enough to protect them.
To take a 3-goal lead at St James's Park. Steve Malbronk against Harper, steps up right foot strike.
Difficult bouncing ball there. Oh, he's given it away to McBride.
Said it comes across to McBride. Is this the hat-trick? Cole is there anyway. It's number 6.
The 2004-05 campaign marked the return of Fulham to Craven Cottage, supposedly temporarily before sorting out a bigger stadium. Yeah, that one's gone down well. Before the season got going, they were dragged through court cases that left them having to pay out the likes of Marseille for Steve Marley and then John Tigana as well. On the pitch, however, we really started to see the Chris Coleman team. Up front came the likes of Brian McBride, Andy Cole and Collins John as Thomas Radzinski departed. Meanwhile, Carlos Bocanegra shored up the backline and Papa Bouba Diop was added to midfield. Sadly, it was the end of the road for Sean Davis, who had been with the club since the 4th tier days as he was acquired by Spurs. On the pitch, you have to say it was a regression by only 4 places but by 8 points, as a team that used to be hard to beat lost almost half their league games. There was a whiff of a League Cup run, but that was quickly extinguished by the eventual champions Chelsea, who had just welcomed Jose Mourinho and would romp to the Premier League over the next 2 seasons.
This is now Klaus Jensen. Close very quickly. Collins John onside. And Fulham have the lead. 1-0 to the...
To run into here, and it's come across towards Steve Malbronk. Tries to get the shot away. Might fall here for Beaumorte.
Beaumorte. It's a terrific run by Luis Beaumorte. Can he finish it? Oh, yes.
For a team that had lost experience in Van der Sar, Cole and Clark and had replaced big names with ones of the calibre of Heide Helgeson, it could be chalked up as a minor miracle that Fulham actually minutely improved in the 05-06 season. It might have helped that they were out of the Cups dead early, but they improved to the tune of 1 position and 4 points as they marked the campaign with famous home wins over Liverpool and Chelsea, whilst claiming their only victory on the road in the entire season at Man City. Weeks into the 06-07 campaign, after a quiet summer in the market, headlined by the replacement of Steve Malbronk with Jimmy Bullard, it looked all for nothing when the incoming midfielder had his season ended in just the 4th match. With Coleman already under pressure, there were storm clouds gathering at the cottage.
Giggs with the ball in. Saha! And now Samaras through and no offside, and it's a goal.
Continue story, click on this video here. If you're too early, click on the other here, the 2000s playlist.